Hello, I'm Sharon Olinka, and I'm going to read from Rebiya Kadeer's Dragon Fighter. And her translator was Alexandra Cavelius. Now, originally a successful businesswoman from Xinjiang, Uyghur Autonomous Region, Kadeer was imprisoned for 6 years from 2000 to 2005 for her work defending the rights of the Muslim Uyghur minority in China. She came to the US in 2005 and is the president of the World Uyghur Congress based in Washington, D.C. In her book, Dragon Fighter, she tells the story of her rise from modest origins and writes about the injustices imposed on the Uyghur minority by the Chinese government. Rebiya Kadeer. On March 16, 2005, a prison officer shouted out my name as she entered my cell at 3 o'clock in the morning. I jumped up. She spoke no other words. None were really necessary. I hastily dressed in anticipation of my release from prison. Just as I was about to leave my cell, I stopped, remembering my handmade blackbird. I looked at the officer as I tentatively reached for it. She said, "Oh, that's not so important. You can take it with you." Men in dark suits were waiting for me at the end of the corridor. They escorted me to the clothing dispensary where I received a pair of pants, shoes, a blouse, and a coat. After I had changed into these clothes, they escorted me in the direction of the main gate. I sensed that we were indeed to embark on a flight to somewhere. It was odd at the airport. The halls were completely empty, as though they had been swept out. Usually that airport teemed with people 24 hours a day. My next thought was that perhaps there was a war as they hurried me across the tarmac toward a military airplane. Once I boarded, I saw Officer Mihiri and one of her female officers waiting for me, along with a group of additional Chinese prison guards. Not a single word was exchanged. 4 hours later, I recognized from above the approaching Beijing landscape. After we landed, Officer Mihiri and her companion prison officer were replaced by 2 other women. There was no opportunity for me to say anything to Mihiri, though I would have liked to. Even now, to this day, I think if I ever had the opportunity to be face to face with Officer Mihiri, I would hug her tightly. With tears in my eyes, I would thank her for being kind to me, tell her how, in that place, what did we do? There was someone who was that kind to me. Then I was taken to a suite in a nice hotel nearby. Diplomats from the Chinese Foreign Ministry arrived just minutes afterwards. They explained to me that I would be flown abroad due to the critically necessary medical treatment I was to undergo. When you live here, Mrs. Kadeer, you'll still have the opportunity to work for us abroad. If you choose to do that, you will also be allowed to continue conducting your business here and to continue to be a multimillionaire. However, if you should choose to reveal to the worldwide community what you've experienced here or continue to be involved in human rights causes, then that would be quite unfortunate. If you choose the latter, you'll experience actions against your children and your businesses to a degree that you haven't yet imagined possible. They'll be finished. Another added, you can decide for yourself whether you want to live in prosperity or in constant difficulty. You have the choice. Until that point, the high-level cadres had not said where they intended to send me. Instead, they emphasized that regardless of my new destination, I would always remain classified in China as a convict. And I learned their plan. We will turn you over to the Americans. My blood felt hot, then cold. The diplomat continued, you have to remember one thing, Mrs. Kadeer. 20 years from now, there will not be any more people known as Uyghurs. You're an intelligent woman, and you should learn to work with us. Now, I want to emphasize, before I read on, that she's given this impossible choice, this ugly choice, by the Chinese authorities. And the way she presents it is extremely moving to me. And then the official continues, you have permission to stay in the United States only for 18 months to undergo your medical treatment. If you feel well after your care, we'll bring you back. Then you can return to your businesses and be an example for your people. All of your 5 children here in China will also be well off. We know how much you love them. You must know, too, that we have made mistakes and that you have made mistakes. I promised I will never do harm to the Chinese people. Later, the Chinese government denounced me in an article claiming Mrs. Rebiya Kadeer did not keep her promise. But that was not true of my promise, as I intended it. I am not fighting against the Chinese people, but rather, just like many Chinese people themselves, I am fighting for a democratically based government and for the unequivocal observance of human rights. Soon after this conversation, officials from the American embassy arrived at the hotel to complete more diplomatic formalities. One asked me, do you want to travel to the United States? Year after year, I had given myself the courage to believe that I would leave prison alive. Standing on the runway, I looked up the staircase to the airplane. It was so close. Just before the handover to the United States Embassy diplomats, one of the Chinese diplomats emphasized, you aren't allowed to receive political support in the United States. And then what happens is, one of the men from the United States Embassy hugged me. He told the Chinese diplomat, sir, as long as this woman doesn't break the laws of our country, she can do what she wants there. This man's hug made me feel like I had already arrived in the United States of America. At last, we boarded the airplane. Only a few hours before, I had been sleeping in my cell. I pinched myself. This was not a dream. In my pocket, I could feel my little blackbird. Someday, with nourishment in my beak, I would fly back to my homeland, just like this bird did in my imagination.